we've been in this series called Walking Each Other Home. And it's really a journey that we're going to go on together, where we're going to look at life through that lens of a walk. And we recognize that, say, if you live here, that if you're going to go on a walk, that the idea of ending up with a injury or a minor inconvenience of a cactus, that is certainly a possibility, right? Maybe if you're someone who is not from here, or you're watching this online, maybe for you, the cactus is not the thing that you're most worried about when you go on a walk or you go on some kind of hike. Like maybe for you, it's poison ivy. That's something that I grew up fearing, right, in the region of California that I was from. I feared poison ivy, and I only got poison ivy one time, but it was really, really bad. I was at this camping trip. There was a bunch of different families, and I got poison ivy, woke up with it on the very last day. So we were leaving, and it was all over my arm, and it looked quite horrific. And I was so embarrassed by it that I decided, look, we're all leaving, so I can get away with this. I'm just going to put like a long sleeve sweatshirt on, and I'm just going to get out of here, and no one's ever going to know, right? But then as we were leaving, everyone was like, so good to see you. Have a good trip home. And I was like, ah. So that was my experience with poison ivy. But the reason I shared that video, the reason we're kind of talking about this in the frame of this series, is because really to be human, to be on the spiritual journey, means to run into the metaphorical cactus from time to time. And so the title of today's message is The Perilous Process, because to be engaged in this process of life means to be open to a certain degree of peril. I had an alternate title for this message earlier in this week, The Prickly Process, because, that's life, right? Last week, I started this series on a treadmill, as some of you saw, and I know that I've kind of raised the bar pretty high in terms of sermon cardio, and so I wanted to just kind of lower the bar a little bit today. There were also some people who came last week for the very first time, and they just thought, like, is this what this church is about? Like, is this the treadmill community or something? But I want to bring expectations back to reality this week. But we are in this series where we're talking about life in terms of a journey, and I think that the frame of a journey gives us a certain degree of freedom to recognize that in life, there are going to be surprises. In life, things are going to be messy. As that song we sang this morning said, I'm going to wake up and mess it up again, right? Things are not going to be so linear. And so as we walk each other home, are we open and prepared for the fact that we're going to end up with some scars and some scrapes and some mud? I know for me, when I get out there on a hike or on a trail, one of the things that I tend to run into is my fear of heights. Anyone else out there have sort of a fear of heights? All right, more honest people in this service than last service, right? For me, it's visceral. For me, I get too high up somewhere, and immediately I just can't move. I get freaked out. And so a couple years ago, Olivia and I were in Sedona, and we walked on this trail called the Devil's Bridge. Do we know this? We heard of Devil's Bridge, right? You know where the story is going by the name of this trail, by the way, right? So this is Devil's Bridge, and this is her and I on there. And basically the way this works is a very popular trail. And so what can happen is that you hike up, and then there's a line that forms, and they let one group go at a time, walk out on the bridge, and you turn around, you face the line, and some kind stranger is there willing to take your picture. Now, what happened for us is it is our turn to go out there, and as we walk out, I start to realize how narrow this bridge is, and as I do, I'm looking down, and I'm realizing just how high up we are, and friends, the picture does not do it justice. It is quite high up and quite narrow. And so I immediately start to freeze up. And then the time comes for us, as we get out to the middle, to turn towards the line so that we can have our picture taken. And Olivia says, all right, it's time to turn. And I'm frozen still, and I could barely move my head. She's like, no, you have to, it's our picture. We have to turn your body. And I'm like, oh, and it takes everything within me, and I cannot turn. And she's laughing, and I barely am able to turn my body and my head enough to get this photo. I've tried to zoom in to the degree that you can see the difficulty I'm having. Now, I get it. There's shadows. It's pixelated. But, I really wanted to highlight right here. That is a death grip. I am not going to let her go. That is how Yes, she is laughing. And that is how my fear of heights shows up. However, about 5-6 years ago, Olivia and I, for a very short amount of time in Washington, we got into rock climbing. This may sound counterintuitive, right? I'm afraid of heights, yet we did rock climbing for a little bit. I think it was because when you're rock climbing, you're strapped in, you feel like, all right, that's going to hold me, whatever. Or maybe I was just trying to get over my fears. Well, for whatever reason, though, getting into the rock climbing community, something that I did find out in the world of rock climbing is that there is a term, and it's a term that to the rest of the world, in most other spheres of life, it's kind of a negative term, but in the rock climbing community, it's a positive term. It's actually a badge of honor. All right, you ready? This term is dirtbag. Has anyone heard this before in terms of rock climbing? Okay. In the rock climbing world, to be a dirtbag means that you prioritize climbing and the next climb and growing in your skills and abilities above all else, right? And so you may be sleeping in or living out of your car or a van for extended periods of time, going from climb to climb. You may or may not have a job. You may or may not have the opportunity to wash your clothes or your body all that much. But you are dedicated and all in to become the best climber you could be. Now, one, I recognize I'm not built for that lifestyle. Two, we didn't really even stay doing the rock climbing thing for all that long. But the dirtbag thing really stuck with me. And I thought about this for a while, and I thought, what would it mean to be a spiritual dirtbag? Now, we are probably the only community this Sunday morning in all the world in which someone encourages you and says, hey, would you consider being a spiritual dirtbag? Okay, we might be the only place in the world to say that. But here's what I mean, okay? Stick with me for a second. The idea I'm saying is, what if we looked at our journey and we looked at our growth and we looked at our opportunities to heal and spiritually evolve, and what we said to ourselves is, what if I prioritize that journey over how I look or present to others, right? What if I prioritize my journey over sometimes the comfort and conveniences of life in such a way that when the difficulties and challenges show up, I could lean into them and see them as part of this process because I am all in. The idea is that if we are going to set out at all toward any type of journey, if we're going to look at our lives through this frame, then we have to recognize that we're going to end up lost from time to time, right? We're going to end up scraping some knees, sunburn. And so the perilous process is really to look at life and say, it's not a matter of if the challenges or the disturbances come, but it's when they do, can I trust the process? Can I see it as part of the journey? Can we be honest for a second? And I know sometimes we in conversation, someone will be like, can I be honest? And you're like, I hope you've been honest this whole time, right? But nonetheless, can I be honest? And let's just be real for a moment. Okay. In life, most of the time, we're all kind of just winging it. Anyone else? Just me? Okay, cool. What I've found is that maturity and wisdom is rarely figuring something out that makes life make sense, but it's more often the recognition that, hey, no one actually knows what they're doing. We're all figuring out as we go. We're all kind of building the bicycle as we ride it, so to speak. Anyone feel this with me? Okay. So, if you feel that, or if maybe you're struggling to feel that, I want to invite you to do an exercise with me in which we're going to kind of look back at our lives and see how these various moments of our lives lead us on this bigger arc. And so if you're willing to kind of go through this exercise, it's called Peaks and Valleys. It actually comes from a philosopher named Julie Reish, okay? And so we're going to do this. What we're going to do is we're going to think of our life in terms of the high moments and the low moments as peaks and valleys. So let's start, and just because we're going throughout our whole life, let's start young, and let's just think about those high moments, those peaks from our childhood, right? Maybe there are moments in our childhood where we could think of as, at the time, the epitome of feeling happy, fulfilled, and carefree, some kind of peak. But also, of course, childhood is hard. Things are confusing. And so probably had some real low moments in our childhood, adolescence, etc., right? So peak and valley. Maybe young adulthood, first job, marriage, whatever it is, right? There are some peaks and excitement and some happiness and fulfillment. And yet there's probably also some incredible difficulties that come with the heightened responsibility of young adulthood, some valleys. We could go throughout the rest of your life, right? And I encourage you to think about it. And just these different various moments, those high moments, those peaks and those valleys, those peaks and those valleys. Now, we're looking kind of at a really zoomed out picture of our life. But are we with me, right? Peaks and valleys of our life, okay? Right? Now, we know that most of life is not lived on the peak or on the valley, but somewhere in between. So what I want us to do then is to take the midpoint of these peaks and valleys, and we're going to draw a line through them, okay? Is this starting to kind of make some sense for us, right? Starting to kind of come together? Okay. When we think about our life in this way, what does this spell? Good job. Most of the time, we're white-knuckling it, are we not? Right? Most of the time, we're trying to figure it out. We don't know. We feel confused. We feel lost. We feel disoriented. And yet I wonder if the big transformation is not something that comes along that ends the discomfort, that ends the uncertainty, that all of a sudden we've figured it all out and everything's great. But it's actually our decision to stop resisting the reality of what life can entail, right? And to embrace some of the challenges and the trials and the unknowing. That life does end up being a bit of an obstacle course so often. But can we look at that and recognize that maybe there is an aspect of these obstacles that we can stop resisting, as John so wonderfully led us in this meditation this morning, to be curious about and to stop fighting or having judgment toward the obstacles, but to recognize them and see really how they're showing up and what they might mean. So I want to give us an opportunity to look at these things with some new eyes, some fresh perspective today. And the first thing that we're going to really explore from this lens is that if you set out on this journey, one of the things that tends to happen is that we feel lost. Anyone ever felt lost or maybe feeling a little lost today? Anyone? Okay. Got some good honesty, right? We can be honest, right? I want to share a quote from the great spiritual teacher Krishnamurti about being lost in the woods. He says, if one is lost in a wood, what is the first thing one does? One stops, doesn't one? One stops and looks around. But the more we are confused and lost in life, the more we chase around, searching, asking, demanding, begging. So the first thing is that you completely stop inwardly. And what would that mean for us? What would that mean to, in the midst of those moments where we tend to want to turn towards frantically resolving a problem? What would it mean to just stop inwardly? I had an experience a couple years ago. Olivia's family was visiting, so we took them to the Desert Museum. Anyone been to the Desert Museum? Yeah, it's a great place. And there's this area in the Desert Museum where it's indoors. It's kind of like a cave, and there's rocks and all kinds of crystals and wonderful things. And there's a part there where you're walking down a hallway, and it splits off, and you can kind of take an alternate route. You end up in the same place, but you walk through more of a cave, more of a cavern. And so I thought this would be super fun. I'm going to go into, and then Olivia and the rest of her family were like, that's a you thing. Go ahead, but like, we're not going to do that. So I crawl into this cave, and I come out the other side, and they are not there. They're supposed to be, but they're not there. They're nowhere to be found. Immediately I panic, so I call her, but of course I'm in a cave, so there's no reception, right? So then I go searching, and I end up taking about a half hour searching through about half of the Desert Museum trying to find Olivia and her family, to no avail. So finally, panicked, I just go back to where I was, where I last saw them, and they're right there waiting for me. They've been waiting for me for a half hour, and I was the one who freaked out and immediately went on some wild goose chase that I did not need to go on. And it's a reminder for me that often in life, the harder we try to resolve situations frantically, the harder on ourselves we make it. Has anyone found this to be true, right? We so quickly want to resolve things. We want an answer, and yet we end up moving in the wrong direction. And so at Krishnamurti's inspiration and encouragement, the question is, what if we stopped inwardly in those moments? Next time you're at a crossroads, next time you're thinking, I could go left or I could go right, I can make this decision or that, and I feel torn. What if before you tried to rush in and resolve it, what if you took a moment, centered yourself, right? Tuned yourself, right? Found peace in the moment, right? Tried to connect to that wiser mind. And one of the ways that I think we can do this is recognizing that we're really not even lost at all. That to be lost is one way of describing the situation we're in, but so often when we look back at our life and we look at the moments that we thought we were lost at the time, we realize that no, we were always finding our way. We never left the process. We never really left the journey. And I just thought I was lost at the time. So friends, can we reframe this idea of being lost in such a way that we find peace in those moments, and perhaps the answers and the right moves will come to us naturally? We do end up lost, right? But something that also happens is we end up in situations totally beyond our control, circumstances that happen and we have no explanation or rationalization for. You might even just think of it as being unlucky, as how it's described in this passage from the wisdom text Ecclesiastes. I took another walk around the neighborhood and realized that on this earth, as it is, the race is not always to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, nor satisfaction to the wise, nor riches to the smart, nor grace to the learned. Sooner or later, bad luck hits us all. Ecclesiastes 9:11. Bit of a downer, I'll admit, right? But I think this is really powerful in context. See, there are two main wisdom texts in the Hebrew scriptures. One is Proverbs, which you might have heard of. The other is Ecclesiastes. They actually go one right after the other, literally and metaphorically, because Proverbs is what we would consider conventional wisdom. A proverb, whether it's from the Hebrew tradition or any other tradition, it kind of goes like this: A plus B equals C. Right? So the Hebrew Proverbs say things like, honor thy father and mother and you will have a long life. Iron sharpens iron. An apple a day keeps the doctor away, right? And that can be helpful. It can be helpful to have that type of wisdom, certainly. That's conventional wisdom. But Ecclesiastes is what we might call post-conventional wisdom. Ecclesiastes says, you know what? Sometimes A plus B does not equal C, right? And I know there's a baby that just walked in, so I would advise the baby to cover their ears. But Proverbs is basically saying, pardon my French, that you might do all the right things and shit still happens, right? That's just true. And here's the thing. Proverbs wisdom, Ecclesiastes wisdom, post-conventional wisdom, conventional wisdom, they're both valid. They both have our place, or they both have their place in our world. But when we struggle, when we go through some of the deepest pains and uncertainties that we will face, it is often the post-conventional wisdom. It is often the ecclesiastical wisdom that gives us a sense that we are not alone. That reminds us that there is a solidarity, that others have felt this way, that others have recognized this aspect of being human, and they stand there with us with a sense of understanding. How many of us, if you're like me, right, I know this is true of me, you face some kind of minor inconvenience and all of a sudden you think the universe is out to get you, right? Because you want to rationalize and have a reason why things aren't going your way. Like I'll get a flat tire and then I'll be like, I know why this happened. I didn't round up at the grocery store. I brought this upon myself. We want to rationalize things. I know we do. But if I've learned anything about life, especially life here in Arizona, it's if you leave your front door, you're risking a cactus or a rattlesnake or something, right? But do we just stay inside because of that? It's the same with life. Like if you're going to be a human, if we're going to live, truly live, there is always a risk. We are always opening ourselves up to the unpredictabilities of life, and yet accepting and embracing that can be the thing that pulls us forward. As M. Scott Peck, the author, once said, once you accept that life is difficult, it becomes much easier. A beautiful paradox. There's something in psychology called negative capability. It essentially is our capacity to sit with pain, to sit with discomfort or uncertainty or doubt without trying to distract ourselves from what we're feeling and without trying to rationalize it and make sense of it, but simply accept that it is there. This is an idea or a term that was coined by the poet Keats. He says that it's the capacity of being in uncertainties, mysteries, doubts, without any irritable reaching after fact and reason, right? We don't need to make sense of it all. We just recognize that sometimes we're lost. Sometimes things happen that we can't control. And what that tends to leave us with is a lot of wear and tear, right? We all have high mileage, so to speak. We all end up with scars, with dirt, right? Ragged, with mud. And yet that's just part of what it means to be alive, to have lived at all. You know, it's a common saying nowadays. People are like, I have zero regrets, right? And to that I'd say, you probably need to live a little more then, right? Go out and find some regrets, right? We have this experience, maybe you've had it, right? But there's kind of this universal experience where you might get something brand new and nice and you want to protect it in its pristine condition, right? Like a new car or house or whatever. I know for me, I've had this experience a couple times in my life with guitars. Like I'll get a nice guitar and then something happens where the very first scrape or dent it gets is heartbreaking, right? Has anyone had this experience, right? Now, my dad, who is also a guitar player, he gave me this wonderful little nugget, and I've stuck with it my whole life. He calls those things character marks, as if they are actually there providing some character, some personality. So now when I get a scrape or a dent, I go, hey, now I'm free. Now I'm free because I recognize this is actually an instrument which is meant to be played, right? Your car is meant to be driven. And so, right, whether it's metaphorically or literally, friends, it's time to take the covers off of your furniture, okay? Sorry if I've offended anyone with that, but I think it's time, right? Now, when it comes to guitars specifically, there's something really interesting in the guitar world around the damage that comes, because often a guitar that is vintage and old can actually go for a lot of money, okay, because of its age. And interestingly enough, a lot of those guitars have those damages, have those scrapes and character marks. But even more bizarre is that in the world of guitar, there are also new guitars that are made intentionally to look messed up and old and scraped. And those guitars look a little something like this. This is a brand new guitar, okay, meant to look damaged. But interestingly, it's a very, very high value guitar, okay? $28,000. Also $560 of shipping for whatever reason. I'm not totally sure why. Now what this is called in the guitar world, this is called a relic. So when you take a new guitar and you relic it, you are giving it the look of all this age and character, and it actually can add value. Now, if you have a guitar that looks like this out there and you try to sell it and nothing happens, don't blame me, okay? I'm not responsible. But here's the idea that I want to present to you today. What if you and we are not a wreck, but we are a relic? Yeah, come on. I heard that in the back. I heard that, woo. Friends, that time that you went through that divorce, or you got fired, or you lost a lot of money, or you made a decision that didn't really work out. Yeah, we learn from those moments, but we don't need to carry around shame, right? We don't pretend that it's not there. We don't hide it, right? We can embrace it as the relics that we are. I mean that in the good way, of course, right? But I grew up in a church environment where people would often share their stories, and they would share a testimony about something that had happened in their life, or something, maybe a decision that they had made that went poorly, and then they would talk about how God had resolved the situation. And now, friends, there's nothing wrong with that. I think that can be beautiful to look at the things that you have been brought through in your life. But there is also sometimes a danger of moving past the real pain that we may still feel about things because we just want to say, hey, it's all tied up, neat and tidy, and God kind of figured it out for me. And so I would hear things like this. I used to have doubts. Now I don't, right? God resolved them all. And I understand that for a lot of people, that may be really helpful, and I respect that. But what I love about a community like ours is that we can come together and we could say, hey, this thing that I went through was really, really hard, period, right? I don't have the answers, period, right? We can say, this thing that happened to me, it still hurts, and I'll probably never be the same, period. Because what if that's actually what it means to be human, right? Not to hide from, but to embrace the scars. Or as Rumi said, the wound is the place where the light enters you, right? Or if you even want to get Jesus about it, right? As the story goes, Jesus maintains his scars even in his divine resurrected form. It's a beautiful part of the story, right? Or perhaps maybe the one that works for you, the metaphor that works for you is kintsugi. If you've ever heard of this Japanese form of pottery in which if a pot breaks, it is not just fixed in such a way that you hide the imperfections, you hide the break, but kintsugi means mended with gold. You highlight the breaking as part of the beauty. So friends, what in your life could be mended with gold? What in your life could you see as a relic, not a wreck? So that we can look at our lives and say, it's not about perfection, it's about presence. It's not about making it through this journey of life unscathed. It's about showing up to every day full of heart. That's what the word courage actually means. The word core is Latin for heart. So to live courageously is to live from your whole heart, to live wholeheartedly. I'm going to close today with a section of a speech from Theodore Roosevelt that he gave in 1910. It's commonly referred to as the Man in the Arena speech. He gave this speech after being president, so this isn't a campaign speech. He's not trying to get anyone to vote for him. He's just reflecting on his experiences and speaking to a world, right, that was really just a few years away from World War I. He was speaking to a world of rising cynicism, fear, skepticism, and a world in which more and more people were criticizing what was happening in the world without really stepping into the arena and getting their hands dirty and getting involved in the messy process. Does that at all ring familiar to anything we might know about a time period at all that we might have familiarity with? Okay, cool. Okay. So I'm going to read this, and as I do, I just want to encourage you to let the words find you at where you might be in your life. Also remembering that this comes from about a century ago, so he uses the word man a lot. We can just obviously pull that into our context, realize that it applies to anyone, and we can just, in the privacy of our own mind, degenderize it altogether. But I'm going to read it as he spoke it, okay? And this is the commonly known as the Man in the Arena speech. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming. But who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. I certainly have not been able to memorize this, but I like to hold on to bits and pieces of this for those moments in my life where I feel the most discouraged and dejected, that I've failed or I don't know where to go, what to do. And I remember that it is better to be in the arena than not to live at all. Brene Brown wrote a book with the title Daring Greatly. So that's the piece that she held to. And I just encourage you, if it's helpful, just to hold on to something from this as a reminder that if you're going to have skin in the game in life, you're going to face failure. You're going to face disappointment. You're going to face fear. And yet it's so much better than never really showing up at all. So my encouragement for today is, friends, would we stay in the arena? Would we stay on the path, even when it's hard, even when it's messy, because you are a relic, not a wreck, that you're not lost at all, that you belong to everything. And maybe it's okay to be a little bit of a dirtbag if it means you're living courageously from your whole heart. And I'll end with this line from the poet Goethe. It's all messy. The hair, the bed, the words, the heart, life.